Peace be upon you once more. My name is Ahmed Sami. I'm a software engineer. Welcome back to Accessibility. How can you make a web application screen reader friendly? Last time we stopped how can we make our dynamic content which appearing on condition. How can we make them screen reader friendly? This time we are going to continue working with our input field. So let's get started with input field. We have a standard form or standard input field, input, which has only one label. In this case, we use the for and ID attributes. I will show you example now. Area described by, we give it on the input itself. If we have some descriptive text we would like the user to know about. We don't need to add role attribute if already you have the type, because type will make role attribute redundant. That's in general, but for input field anyway, you will have to give it type, because we have a lot of different inputs like numbers, date, color, stuff like this, and so on. Example will be like this. This is the standard input field, label for the input field, with the for attribute, which has the value of ID of the input field itself, as you can see it down there. That's why we call it for and ID attribute. Area described by has the value of ID of the descriptive text, which down there on the third line. That's for the input with a standard one label. We are going to continue with form with inputs which has more than one label, not just one. In this case, we are going to use what we call it labels IDs by giving the label itself, not for in this time, but we give each label a unique ID, which we're going to use later. We use area labeled by on the input field itself, pointing to the labels by the sequence which we would like the screen reader to announce to the user. Main label is the first, then the input field label attribute. The same with area described by to describe more descriptive text. After that, here is an example of label and ID. That is the first one, the input field of with label and inputs. Let's continue to check our groups. Checkboxes group. When you have more than one checkbox under a specific category or a specific group, you would like the user to know about that he is inside a group of checkboxes. So all these checkboxes are related to one specific group, like you can see sandwich, condensement, stuff like this. Continue. Here is the checkboxes container. It should be a container containing all these checkboxes inside it, like if it's an ordered list or a div, we give this container a role of group. So first checkbox will get focused. It will be announced that this checkbox belongs to a group of checkboxes. And the area labeled by, we are going to give it ID of this label, which containing all these groups together. Okay, continuing. Area label is for the input itself to describe the group, in case if you don't have a custom label. As you can see, here is the sandwich condiments. There is a custom label for all of them. If you don't have something like this, you should use area labeled by on the group, the container, instead of area labeled by. If you use an ordered list, in this case you give it role presentation to avoid Firefox counting. Sometimes for checkboxes you don't have a counters. The checkboxes, it will be just announced as a group, nothing more, no counter for the checkboxes. For the checkboxes themselves, you will have the for and ID attribute as a normal input and label field. Also no need to add role attribute because you have the type. Let's go to radio group. It is the same idea also, but the difference between radio group and checkboxes group that in radio group you choose only one option. So it looks like it's similar, like you have a drop down menu, something like this. So for the radio container, there is a specific radio group role already. You give this container a role of radio group, and the list will keep going the same as the checkbox group. Area labeled by, custom label ID. You don't have this custom label ID, you give it area label. The same if you use an ordered list, you give it role presentation or none for Firefox. And for the radios themselves, use also for and ID attributes. And no need to add role because already you have the type, make this role redundant. Okay, now we finish the presentational part. Let's go to the practical part together to see it how it works. Here is nvda, here is the source code. Let's very quick check the source code together. Let's make it a little bit bigger for you to see. Okay, here as you can see, I have input fields. I have login form. If you notice, I'm giving it ID login form. You will see it now. But first one, username has a label with attribute of 4 because I made this username input and its label as a standard one. So 4 pointing to the input, area described by, pointing to the description text below. You will see it now. For the password, I make it non-standard, like with more than label. This is a password label. For the input field, I give it the login form, the main form. Here it is. Where? Here is the login form ID. I give it to my input field as the first ID for area labeled by. Then password label is the second for ID. The same area described by a text like text descriptive below. That's for the input field. For the checkboxes, the same. As you can see, I have an ordered list here which containing list of checkboxes. I give this role group area described by because I have already a custom label here. If I don't have this custom label, I should add here area label and give it a descriptive text so it will be announced what this checkbox about it group. The same for radio buttons. You can check it with me here. I give it role of radio button, area described by also the ID because I have a custom description for the button group. And for the groups, you can see the list and the type of radio and keep going the same. Okay, so that's for our code, how the source code looks like. I will leave a link below to this file on GitHub repository so you can download it. You can check the code by yourself. Now let's go to the practical part, starting our nvda. Okay, Firefox, and now let's navigating our application. As you can see, please login form label username. Now we start using tab. We get focus into username. You can see your username is a label. Then required because this field is required. Then invalid entries because there is nothing. Has autocomplete. It has autocomplete. Username should be blank because there is no username, so it announced blank. There is nothing inside, so it announced blank. But as you can see, the descriptive text already we described it. This is a standard input. Now let's keep focusing to the non-standard input, which is password. You can see now that I have login form label here, login form label. Then your password second label, and keep going. Password should be, it is the hint. Okay, now let's go to our checkboxes to see how they will announce. Here is the checkboxes. As you can see, checkboxes grouping, checkbox 1. Then you keep announcing the checkboxes. If you notice now, once we start into radio group, radio 1, radio bottom checked, radio bottoms grouping, because there are radio bottoms in this situation. They are grouping inside one radio group. You can navigate the radio group using the arrow up and down, left or right, and you can see because the radio bottom is similar to drop down menu, you have already counter like 1 from 1 from 4, 2, 3 from 4, like this, until you leave the radio group. Okay, that was a quick demonstration how you can make your input field custom or standard. How can you make checkbox and radio groups screen reader friendly. See you next time with a new element. Until then, have a nice coding time. Bye bye.